hide behind the cloak. And if you stay in the mist, you gon' be soaked. So listen up, cause this hair of the dog, what's real, what ain't? Is this the fog or smog? Cause there's a difference when you breathe it in. So don't let the corporate media take you for a spin. This that morning show, they put you in the know. So I hope that you ready, cause all we do is go, go, go. Yeah, come get your info, you gon' be like, whoa. Hair of the dog, we bout that, ayy. We in the zone, we out here, yeah. Speeding the facts.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Hair of the Dog. I'm Andy Kennedy, and we are in, of course, Fuck It Friday, which we usually are, right? And, you know, there's maybe for no other reason that it's just, you know, alliteration at its finest. Today we have, well, I'm just going to, here, let me just introduce my co-host first, because I think that is going to be very helpful in the explanation of why this is Fuck It Friday. So I would like to introduce my lovely and talented co-host, Ms. Gerber. Good morning.
I love that. That was so formal. I appreciate that. Thank you. And solidarity today with brothers and sisters in Detroit who have taken to the streets. I love it. I love it. So it's Chicago, New York, Detroit, all these big metropolitan areas. They laced up their marching shoes and they went out there and said, fuck Trump and fuck Biden. We are totally against neoliberal austerity policy, and I hope that it catches fire around the rest of the country too, because that is what we need. In case people haven't been paying attention for the last, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, we have run out of time. We do not have time for status quo. And by the way, if you're a DNC operative or a Democrat and you actually kind of want to win an election, progressive centrist policy is where you want to be. And the data clearly shows this from the last election we had, 2 weeks ago. Yeah, so that's where we're at. And I am totally on board with everyone expressing their views and saying, hey, enough is enough. We need to look out for each other. And this whole idea, I keep going back to Dr. Dillon, Dr. Burdett, who said something so eloquent. He said, we are the ones who suffer so that others may live comfortably. And that is true. Every time someone gets on board with a incrementalist or a status quo or pragmatic, what they are actually saying is it's okay for other people to suffer and die so that some of us can remain comfortable in our status quo. And sorry, that's no longer going to cut it. So that's where I'm at today.
And as people wake up and start to understand this, their response should be, take your status quo and shove it up your ass. As far as I'm concerned.
Well, as far as most people are concerned, obviously this is what people are talking about. So I think that in my mind, here's where I'm at. I'm call me a radical if you want, but if you are going to make the position an argument for status quo or pragmatic or incrementalism, I'm all for that. I totally support your right to your opinion. However, I want you to have the courage of your convictions, and you volunteer to go first. You and your family, you put them all together, all of it together, and you volunteer them to suffer and die first. Quit putting my family in the front line. Quit putting the families of those who are marginalized and low income, and the inequality factor is just off the charts. Quit sacrificing them for yourselves. If you're going to make that position, you go first. Prove to me that you really mean it.
Absolutely. And that's the whole gist of what we're talking about here. If you're going to be a centrist Democrat or a neoliberal apologist or whatever term you want to use, okay? The problem is, if you're going to call yourself progressive, right? I want to ask you why. right? Why can't you own the fact that you're a moderate? Why don't you own the fact that you're a centrist? Is it because you know in your heart of heart that you are screwing the rest of the country, right? That I am going to appear to be a progressive, so I am accepted by the citizenry, and I don't have to answer to the neoliberal regime's policies, right? So I think it's very telling. And I'm hoping that today's conversation will bring a light to that.
Totally agree. Absolutely. Obviously, I agree with you, Andy, because you're always right. So
Yes, I think that's a given.
Right. So just real quick, for those who are tuning in for the first time, where the hell have you been? Good morning. Welcome to Friday the 13th. Welcome to some of our more active viewers and participants. Mike, good morning. For those of you who are new, we are live. And if you type something in the chat, particularly on our Facebook page, Digital Liberation Front Live, or on our Twitter feed, Periscope, we'll see those comments. We read them on air. We have no shame, no fear. We want you to join this conversation, and we open it up to everyone across the political spectrum. Now, if you say something crazy, well, play silly games, win silly prizes. But if you're really interested in joining the conversation and pushing back on some of the things we say, maybe you disagree and maybe you have some data analysis, a critique that you want to share, let's talk about it. That's what we do here. We are all about critical thinking, providing source data, all of that sort of thing, and we will do that throughout this particular conversation. So what I'm going to do here in just a few minutes is post the links to some of the conversation that we're going to have today. And obviously, we do our homework. So we're going to go out and put these links on there, and this is going to show you some of the data that I am particularly pulling from. So for those of you who don't know my background on this, I was a whistleblower in 2015 at the Obama administration. I was at the White House with Valerie Jarrett and the acting director of the EPA. The prior director had resigned over Obama's fracking policy. She got so pissed off, she said, screw this, and she went home. So it was the acting director and Valerie Jarrett. And when it came my turn to speak, I was the one who forwarded to them, hey, we have a problem with the ACA implementation because private insurance companies are able to act as they want. It's part of their entire mandate and mantra for profitability. And oh, by the way, if you live within 5 miles of a fracking well, you cannot buy insurance cash in hand. They will not write a policy to you. And I recall that moment where the EPA director, his face turned bright red and his eyebrows furrowed. Valerie Jarrett swallowed uncomfortably, looked down, and the EPA guy said, well, we have the Air and Water Protection Act that's coming out. That was great. Did nothing for these families all across the country. I had 5 in my client list I could not write a policy for. They were not eligible for Medicaid. They were not eligible for COBRA. They didn't get insurance through their employers. They were stuck. It was a desert. And that is just one little example of problems with the ACA that have never been fixed, that have now come to the forefront in a Biden administration that is totally on board with fracking. So keep that in mind as we go through this conversation. I know the ACA pretty well, so you're going to have to come correct if you're going to push back on some of this information. Just fair warning on that. So all right, today we are going back to our grassroots focus. The entire point of doing the independent media piece is giving voice to independent media, to journalists, to all of these good voices, good ideas, and people around the country who have something to say, something credible, something that maybe is worth a deeper conversation. And that is why we've invited Mr. Fantastic this morning. So Mr. Fantastic is a champion on Twitter. And I think what bubbled up about the way that he communicates on Twitter is just a fantastic approach. First, I want to go to Warren Gunnels to set up this entire conversation. Warren Gunnels, for those of you who are not familiar, he's the finance guy. He's Mr. Receipts when it comes to Bernie Sanders and his policies. When we talk about the cost savings of progressive policy, which is not socialism, it is absolutely center policy. Fiscally responsible, socially responsible, that's center. And the problem is we have corporate media, oligarchs, and all of these who keep telling people it's socialism. It's not. Socialism is something different. This is part of when, you don't have private for-profit corporations participating in a regulatory environment. In fact, the free market itself is set up because of regulations. It creates the ring within which business operates. So Medicare for all and all of these progressive policies rely on regulations to stop monopolies, to stop corruption, all of these things. So that's what we're talking about. So Mr. Gunnels had this wonderful tweet that he put out, and just you can read through it, but he's absolutely right on all of these things. And this is the pushback on the neoliberalism, that we need to keep that framework in place and keep directing all the neoliberals, the MAGAs, blue MAGA, red MAGA, all of them, keep them on the conversation. And I will say this, Joseph Brandon has wonderful tools and guidelines to help us in this fascism. We're still kind of in a fascism place here, to keep fascists on point, to keep them in the argument, because they so often try to derail it, to marginalize the conversation and get you off track. So Mr. Gunnels here has your framework that you can work from as you push back on all of these sit down, it's not time, unity, all of these things. So bookmark this, save it somewhere, keep it where you can refer to it, because this is going to be your go-to play in order for us to get that conversation where it needs to be, something more civil, pragmatic, and understood by the Blue MAGA team. So with that, Andy, let's put up the first tweet here from Mr. Fantastic. And this is kind of what caught my attention about this particular gentleman out of Washington, D.C. He was pushing back on the neoliberalism, and already we're seeing them with their misinformation campaign and, throwing out data that's coming in from the election. So the overriding narrative is that progressive policy has been an albatross for Democrats trying to get reelected. Let's ignore over 1,000 seats lost. Let's ignore all of the positions and policies that have been lost by the Democrats themselves trying to be Republican light. Let's ignore the complete and utter failure of the third way Democrat, which is really a Republican. So he was able to push back and kind of caught my attention here. So go to his next one here. So there's an entire Twitter thread where he was out here, and this was a conversation about Jim Clayborne, and Jim Clayborne's been making the news lately about, he's the one who actually used the term progressives are, the progressive policy is an albatross for the DNC, and again, completely ignoring the data that's coming in. And I think what's very telling, and from a marketing perspective, it was the black vote that once again carried the day, that saved our asses. It's happened in Alabama, Louisiana, Arizona, Chicago, South Carolina, North Carolina. It's the black vote that is pushing the Democrats to victory. And as I said before, on Monday and Wednesday, the bill is coming due. You better do something to help people, particularly people of color, with income inequality and access to justice. That bill is coming due, and what we see in this entire tweet thread is, no, let's not even, no, it's okay. It's time for you to fall in line. So without further ado, let's bring on the gentleman himself who had this fantastic narrative and conversation in a much more pragmatic way than I am able to do. So, Mr. Fantastic, are you there with us this morning? Good morning.
Good morning, Kerri. How you doing?
I'm good. So, we were just going through this thread that really caught my attention. I was like, you know what? This guy's got something to say. And you did it so well. You did it calm and just, basic statements. Yeah, that's not true. And you put up supporting data. I feel like in this conversation, your data was more targeted to other people watching the conversation, because I feel like these people were just, I don't want to hear it. Did you feel that way?
Yes. I mean, the reason I feel that way is, look, I want to me, a lot of them are like K-hivers. You can identify them with like the yellow heart. I generally have negative experiences with them, but you have Black people who believe in all kind of political beliefs. So, for me, I want to engage them with, okay, they probably don't know or heard something that wasn't true, because in my opinion, you have we have to distinguish between Black Democratic voters and Black Democratic leadership. That's a very important distinction to make, because they're trying to, the DNC is trying to drive a wedge between, and try to do the goal campaign of, Black Democrats, they don't want progressive policies. Latino Democrats, they don't want progressive policies. That's not true. Like we saw in the reason, I think Sanders made mistakes in appealing to, for example, African Americans specifically. I think he could have ran a more culturally in tune campaign. I think he could have answered the reparations answer better, but they went out there on purpose to try to, they knew what they were doing. They were trying to fearmonger and say, oh, he's a socialist, he can't win, he can't beat Trump, and you got to just, go with the pragmatic candidate like Joe Biden. And, people were like, all right, well, look, I prefer Sanders' policy, but I got to go with Sanders. And they keep trying to manufacture a narrative that they can't win, so they can, keep supporting, neoliberals like that. That, like my mom, she's more of thinks more like a mainstream Democrat. So, but one of the ways I just started to push back on that is just, okay, I think a lot of reasons corporate media tells people, basically, you're the media you consume. So if you're watching corporate media, you're going to take in the talking point. So let me just send my mom, hey, let me send her this stuff. Because me and my dad and my sister talked about politics in the text. I'm just going to send her stuff. So now it's, she likes AOC more. So I just decided on Twitter, I'm going to try to be friendlier. Like, I'm going to be a dick when I just think you're outright lying on me. But at the same time, like, if you know you're right, you don't need to be a jerk about it. And I think that's very important. It's like when you're canvassing. Even if somebody says something isn't true, you have to try to address them with respect, And that's where the Clayborne thing came in, because like people are going to defend Clayborne because he was very involved in the civil rights movement, just like John Lewis was involved in the civil rights movement. So like they did put in the work, and they have put in the, they have legacy, making life better for Black people, but doesn't mean that they're right on all the issues today. So because of that, you have to dissent and just speak out when you say, hey, I think you're wrong on the data. I think you're wrong on that. On defund the police, like especially costing Democratic candidates, and saying we shouldn't do that and say that, when back in your day, a lot of, from what I understand, Black parents did not want their kids marching in the civil rights movement. Just like my dad is like hesitant about like, hey, you got to be careful, when you're going out there, like, he gets scared. I get it, but it's like freedom ain't free, like, And sometimes the older generation is just wrong, and you need to push. There's a reason younger people are in charge of revolutions and movements, because they have less to lose, and they're just less scared. And you don't have arthritis and issues. I mean, I didn't want to go all that. I'm always been for Clayborne as it is, but yeah, I mean, you just gotta speak truth to power, and that's gonna offend some people, because they do look at him in that light. So, I mean, look at what happened with Cornel West when he spoke out to Obama. But the consequence of not criticizing people is that you don't get what you want. You know, I mean, same thing what happened with the left overall. A lot of the left was very complacent under Obama, and they got maybe some gains, but overall, you know, this kind of stand culture that can be prevalent in really any community needs to be, you know, we can't just have that. That's not even real politics, you know.
There was a time that I point to back in the campaign in Florida when we were still basically at a point where Bernie was still in the race, and it was him against Biden. It was after South Carolina, and they polled Floridians, you know, the place Florida where democracy and fair elections go to die. They polled them and they asked Floridians who was stronger on Medicare and Social Security. Oh, yeah, I remember. And overwhelmingly, they said Biden, right? Yeah. They said the guy that's tried to cut Social Security and Medicare for most of his career, as opposed to Biden, or opposed to Bernie, who wants to strengthen it, make it stronger and take care of people, right? And we have to ask ourselves, why did that occur? How can people in their right mind think that Biden is stronger? And it's just simply a matter of messaging, right? It's what the mainstream media, who has been talking in terms of Biden being the most progressive person, most progressive candidate running for the Democrats, right? And that whole thing is the only people that are pushing back against that are progressives with not nearly as strong a voice as mainstream media, right? And that's the problems that we face. Right.
No, I agree with what you said. I mean, you know, for me, I do think though Bernie could have done more. And like, for example, the first attack that he had coming out of Iowa, that was a great ad. I don't know why he didn't run that more often. You know, I think that was his biggest mistake, is just not attack. Because the thing is, when you attack your opponent by saying, you know, that was one of the reasons he lost Iowa over Social Security. So he should have kept doing that over and over. So Bernie does play. He wants to win. He has a responsibility to get the message out. And one of the best ways by doing it is attacking somebody on the substance. Because the thing is, he's spoken out about how he knows how biased corporate media is, you know, and that's also why, you know, I feel like he should have had Nina Turner on, David Sirota on, you know, the people to push back, because we know how biased corporate media, like you already know you're going into the lines then, so you should already expect those kind of attacks. But otherwise, beyond that, I mean, you know, obviously we need more independent outlets like yours, and not only that, but people to fund them. You know, we have to be giving $1 or $2. I mean, honestly, I should be funding other outlets more. I'm kind of short on money right now, but So let's do that segue right here. So for those of you who are interested in supporting independent media, we have a Patreon account. It's patreon.com/Digital Liberation Front. It's long. Just go with it. But if our media is not the one you want, then support somebody. Give them $1, because we talked about this on Wednesday with our journalism roundup, the paywalls, and honestly, to your point about messaging, this is where the DNC has put their focus, right? So Andy and I did a 3-part series on the monolithic Latino vote, right? White people always get it wrong. All Latinos are the same. So we went through 3 different segments and clearly showed how the GOP, the RNC, had been dedicating money, time, and resources over 20 years to individual reach. Whereas what Democrats do is marketing, just that general marketing and flyers and all of that sort of thing. Yeah. And that tactic does not work. So this is why Bernie actually was picking up so many Republicans and things like this, was because it was on us to have those conversations with neighbors and family members. Just like you were saying here about
pushing back on that narrative online on Twitter, as you did so eloquently. So let's get into Clayborne just a little bit, because here's where I think the DNC is also really good at shutting down conversations, because we focus on identity politics. And I thought it was kind of funny when I saw the interviews with Clayborne. They picked the lightest Black people they could to interview him. I was like, wow, these people are almost as light as I am. And you could not have a white person pushing back on Clayborne, because he is a champion of, let me say this respectfully, he was a champion of equality and civil rights. Looking back over his voting record over the last 10 years, he got a little soft on us. And in that, what I'm looking at specifically is when he pushed back on the slogan of defund the police and Medicare for all, calling those two in particular an albatross, focusing on the slogan, not the policy. So let's talk about Clayborne just a little bit. So in my mind, the good that I have done is not offset by the bad that I do today, right? So if I do something good 20 years ago, I save a life, I do some really amazing things, that doesn't necessarily mean that I can't make a mistake today. Would we agree?
That's what I think. But, again, if it depends on, that's going to depend on how old you are or how much you look up to someone like Clayborne. The thing is, I'm half African and half Senegalese, but to people who are African American or ADOS in the country, people want to make that distinction between those groups. You have a lot of Southern Black people who did have, direct ties to the civil rights movement, or they know someone, or, in that era. So it's more a personal connection. So that's how deep it goes for some people. That's why, when he speaks, again, people look at him like, oh, it's literally like someone, your literal grandpa. I mean, I'm sure if you grew up in a traditional household, you can't speak back against the elder. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's why I said, he's your elder, but I don't recognize him as such. That was my point in saying, look, I'm not going to look at him in the same way, because for me, an elder would be like a Cornel West or like an Angela Davis. Those are the people politically that I look up to, because that's the thing. I treat him like a political opponent because of his actions that he's done lately. And I think that needs to be distinguished, that you can love the man and what he's done in the past, but you cannot, by the standards of not just progressivism, but especially Black activism. Because if you look at Black Lives Matter agenda, a lot of that stuff is on the left. I remember that Chiron they had on Fox News where it was movement for Black Lives. What do they want? The first thing was reparations. One of the other things is redistribute the wealth. The other thing is no cash bail, or let all prostitutes out of jail. It's radical stuff. But Clayborne is maybe supports 2-3 of those things. It's not he supports the whole agenda. That's precisely why drawing contrast, and especially attacking when you're running a campaign next time, whoever the next progressive is, attacking people on these contrasts is important. You have to distinguish, because everybody's calling himself a progressive now. And now it's going to work better for Clayborne because he has something that he can speak to. That's why you need to say, okay, you did that, but what about these policies right now? It's important to have that policy distinction, which is exactly why they go out of their way to shut it down with, I got to be honest, I don't like the term when people use identity politics, because I do think that there's issues specific to Black people that we should talk about, like racial wealth gap and reparations. But when we say identity politics, I feel like it's a catch-all term to make social issues sound bad. I just prefer to say weaponizing racism and sexism. That's what it is, and that's what they're doing. You know what I mean?
Fair enough. So right now we're seeing, there's a dichotomy. You've got Kamala Harris now, the first VP woman of color with all of her family background, which is great.
Yeah.
Policy-wise, I question her ability to, she was a co-sponsor of Medicare for All, and now is laughing about it. So I'm interested to see what she's actually going to do. Now, that doesn't take away from the historical nature of her nomination. However, yeah, that's great. Now, do something with it, right? And it's the same thing with Clayborne. So I went out and took a look at Clayborne's platform, particularly when it comes to healthcare, because that's kind of in my bailiwick. He was not a co-sponsor of Medicare for All, even though so many of his colleagues have stepped forward to it. And then the graphic that you posted was on all of these candidates who won based on their support for Medicare for All. Now, correlation is not necessarily causation, but when you see Fox News viewers responding so favorably to a platform like Medicare for All, why isn't Clayborne on board yet? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, there's an article in the Post Courier, that's the South Carolina newspaper. I mean, he's one of the biggest recipients of big pharma money. That's a blatant. That's a fact. I mean, there goes your answer right there.
Yeah, Cory Booker.
Right, and Cory Booker too. I mean, big pharma is one of the biggest donors of the Democratic Party. So I mean, that's why, they know why they're opposed to that policy. I don't they pretend that they're dumb, but I don't think they're that dumb. They know that these policies have majority support, but it's. The donors are the ones cutting the check, so they have to go out there and do and say whatever it is to oppose, things. Well,
that's the problem, right? That's the main problem, because we see the activists, right? Which all of, the John Lewises and the Claybornes were all during the 60s, during the Civil Rights Movement, right? That was what they did. That was the movement that affected change. And we understand that. And Bernie's tried to tell us that change doesn't come from the top, it comes from the bottom. It always has, right? When you have politicians that are in the system that is corrupt, they cannot affect change from within that system. And because in order to stay a politician, you must get reelected. When you have to get reelected, you need donors to fund that re-election, right? That's the problem. I mean, when we have PBC activists that are punching up at AOC because, well, how can she say that? How can she, agree with Pelosi all the time? Well, she is still a progressive, but she has to work in that system, right? And they all say the same thing. And Bernie's message was not me, us, right? And that's the key. We have to understand that it's the grassroots movement that's going to create the foundation to make it possible for politicians to affect change, because they won't have a choice anymore if they want to remain politicians, right?
Right. Fun fact. I remember. I think there's an article that came out, but it's when Black Lives Matter first came out. I think they're saying that basically, the CBC, they felt like they were chastised by the CBC, the Congressional Black Caucus. There's always going to be a divide between, the activist class and politician class, because they got two different interests, So I think the reason that for example, you had the uprisings that you did with around George Floyd is because, people were forced into it. With coronavirus shutting down sports, shutting down entertainment, there was no stimulus. And on top of it, police brutality, it forced people into fighting back and pushing back, and the thing is, election was over, so there was no quote unquote savior, and that's ultimately, I believe in electoral politics, but at the end of the day, it is true that movements push people. Even Sanders had to be pushed on some of his issues. Biden had to be pushed on some of his issues. Hillary had to be pushed. Obama was pushed on some of his issues. That's the most, and they don't teach you this in school, I feel like, as effectively as they should. sometimes you learn about, the labor movement was good, and then FDR, like, but it's more like, I feel like in school it comes across like FDR did all these major things. No, he was pushed, Same thing, Lyndon Johnson, who was pushed by Martin Luther King. Anti-apartheid movement was pushed, like environmental movement pushed people, and that's what they should teach.
Listen, Nixon created the EPA.
Yeah.
People don't realize that. Why did Nixon create the EPA? Because he was pushed.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even Trump had to pretend like he cared about criminal justice reform and with the stuff over the summer because, there was just so much of a pushback. So it's like, that's why to me, when one of the biggest things about defund the police that, like the slogan, like, for example, okay, for the slogan, let me do a good faith criticism about the slogan. I've said defund the police, refund the community. That way it's like, okay, it rhymes and people know that it's not just about, cutting the police budget. I mean, I'm more defund the police. I'm not abolish the police. Some people do want to abolish the police, but cut the police budget and then redistribute that money into rehab and schools and hospitals and stuff like that. And
say that again. Say that phrase again.
I've written defund the police, refund the people, or defund the police, refund the community. So like people know that it's not just about slashing the police budget or just, it's about taking that bloated police budget and putting it into actual resources, that can prevent crime, like neighborhoods with better schools, with better hospitals, better rehab, better, jobs. They don't have issues with crime. So, I mean, that's, I think that there's one criticism on messaging I accept, but it's like, I just think that sometimes what I don't like about, some liberals and Democrats is that they just accept the framing as is. Like, it's like they don't really think they can push public opinion. Yeah, defund police it's not majority support among the population yet. Or why don't we try to educate it so that it does?
Well, isn't the purpose of a slogan to begin with something that starts that conversation, right? So if I'm out there saying defund the police and you go, wait a second, that's stupid. I'm like, no, hear me out, right? Well, isn't that what's supposed to happen? So it began the conversation into qualified immunity and the fact that I, as a taxpayer, have to pay for all these lawsuits that my local police department is losing because of brutality and wrongful death and whatever else. So once again, we have made public the loss, but privatized the protection for a civil servant. So isn't that basically what we're supposed to do? The sloganing may be imperfect, but it's supposed to start the conversation, I would think.
I mean, that's the point. That's the point. I mean, like, I feel like that's a fight you should want to have. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of Kamala Harris, but I mean, even she was able to, push back against, I think, Meghan McCain, be like, well, what do you mean by there's two different things? There's abolish the police, there's defund the police, there's not, So, I mean, even she can make that distinction. And so you have bad faith critics in the right wing and some right wing Democrats who are like, well, I don't know what you mean. Nobody wants to get rid of the police, so we should just not have this and that's like, that like you're supposed to be controversial, I think is the whole issue of like being an actor. Because you're trying to change the debate. Like the right wing understands this. That's why they can, like, they don't care. They go for all out for their beliefs. Like that's why they can drive down opinion on the public option that they famously did. They call it like death panels and stuff like that. And it's like
they're masters of messaging.
Exactly. Yeah. And but the issue is, activists, I feel like, can be good at messaging, but they're shut out of the Democratic Party because leadership doesn't want those ideas. That to me is what they're really saying, and that's what we have to push back against. So. Okay,
so there are two comments from viewers this morning that I want to get to. First is from Dave. Good morning, Dave. He said he applauds your point about pushing, and he says it's a good reminder that we need to raise our standards. Yes. Right? Not just go with lower. And then Mike Toller, who is always quick with the memes, he says, crime drops when people have access to upward mobility. And the RNC and DNC, we're not having it. So this is the basis of progressive policy. It is central, fiscally responsible, socially sound, and this leads to an end or diminishing the income inequality, the justice inequality, all all of they're asking for, which, I cannot in my mind understand how someone can reasonably defend their against these things. How are you seriously, even as a Biden supporter, a Harris supporter, Warren, or anyone else, going to suggest that due process and equal protection should be an incremental approach? This was written into our Constitution. It's supposed to be part of our justice system. How can you go back 200 years and say incremental, right?
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's just the pull yourself up by our bootstraps mentality. I mean, it's present in every community. Like, it's present in Black people too. Like, many Black people supported the crime bill back in the day, and the whole point was, well, these people are just messing up the community. We need to be tough on those guys. And look, I could maybe understand why that happened. Like, I lived in DC, it was a murder capital at one point. I could also understand why people, buy into it. And the thing is also, I feel like Black people buy into it too because they have no choice. The racial wealth gap has been strong for so long that they don't feel like the government's going to give them a handout. So they have to pull themselves up, and they get that from some churches. They get that from, they put the celebrities on TV, like Jay-Z and Oprah, and like, oh, see, you can make it too if you work hard. And, that's the only path shown of how you can change your condition in life. Again,
well, to your point, let's look at Clayborne's own family members who pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. His daughter was appointed to the FCC committee, right? So that was her pulling herself up by her bootstraps based on her last name.
Right.
There's a fallacy there. And then when I started pulling apart, and I posted the links to this, his own congressional district, the 6th district in South Carolina, when you look at income and households and rents, so in that district, the one that he represents, where he's saying status quo and incremental approach, the majority of people don't even make $45,000 a year, but yet their rents and mortgages are about $1,000 to $1,400. Yeah. And that's a state that did not expand Medicaid, which he is pushing for. But Medicaid expansion in that state, they are like, I forget the chart. They're like 35th in reimbursement rates for doctors and hospitals, which means there are fewer doctors and hospitals that can afford to take Medicaid patients. So what he is literally advocating for in his own district is people to get a policy that says Medicaid and no access to care. Yeah. Where are the bootstraps there?
I mean, politicians are hypocrites too. I mean, that's the thing is like people, that's precisely why we have to, keep talking and just try to connect the dots as humanly possible. And I think that, more Black progressives and Black people, Black activists also just need to keep speaking out and pushing back against these type of narratives because, they try to frame it like when you have people like, again, Angela Rye and Bakari Sellers on TV as the only representatives of, what's acceptable Black thought as opposed to, I mean, now they have Nina Turner, they have Cornel West on occasionally, but the more voices you have pushing back, the more you have people saying, hey, we liked Obama, we like, ACA was a good start, but we want something more. We want M4A because, we want universal health care. We want, to defund the police because we want to bring the police under control. The more voices you just have saying that and connecting the dots, because the more effective it'll be. Because, again, the weaponizing racism and sexism, that works because a lot, like, it's like the reverse Southern strategy. That's what it is to me. Like Donald Trump goes out there and appeals to his supporters using pretty much racism, white identity politics, and all the like. A lot of these Democrats, that's all they have to offer. That's how they keep people in line. Oh, well, we don't have anything to offer, but Trump is worse when he is worse. That's why I voted for Biden. I didn't like Biden, but to me, it's like, well, he's going to use the military to like bring in fascism. So. That, but I mean, that's what they do. So we have to just keep forcing that policy conversation. And that's why they're scared because we only have to get for people who are depressed, you only have to get it right once. let's be clear, you only have to get it right once, you know, and one day the dams just break open, and that's what they're afraid of. They know that AOC and Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, they know they have power. AOC did what? A Twitch stream when she got like 500,000 people to drive out the vote. What neoliberal could do that? The only one who could come close to that is Obama, and you know, he's got an iron grip on the party. But I mean, the older he gets, the more new blood comes in. I mean, they know how this story goes. Like, new blood comes up, new blood will rise, and the old fades. And so that's, you know, they're looking at the long term of how this could. It's, you know, again, it's about just preservation of their own power. But again, the answer to me is all the same. You have to keep pushing back. You have to keep building power. And
I agree with that. And the other thing that I think is that we don't give enough credit to the people out there that are actually understanding what's happening, right? Because when you look at the situation that we just went through in the election, that graphic that you posted on Twitter that we just posted here a few minutes ago, right? That said that we are looking at these candidates that are coming out and proclaiming that they are progressives. They're not getting Koch brother money, right? They're going to be funded grassroots during a pandemic when they literally have to curtail most of their regular fundraising going door to door, right? They still won. Why? Because people are starting, despite the narrative on mainstream media and the centrist Democrats and the neoliberal politicians, despite that narrative, they're still winning because that's what the people want.
yes,
And they have to come to an understanding that that's what's going to happen. We have to keep our momentum going, right? There are more congressmen and women that now identify as progressives than identify as moderates. That's a big deal.
yeah. Again, same thing. Like, they know what's coming, but it's like, you know, my dad's like, you know, some of these politicians, they act like African politicians. They're 80 years old and they just don't want to step down. Like, you know, you're gonna have to just get these people out with a crowbar. That's why I support like primaries against, you know, all these sitting Democrats, because even if you don't win, like, there are many progressives that did lose their races, but even if you don't win, it still advances the conversation, because these are Democratic voters who get to, you know, this thing, oh, I have options, and that empowers voters, you know, that empowers voters who want different decisions, and it ultimately moves the goal forward. So, you know.
Absolutely. So before we get out of here, first off, thank you so much, Mr. Fantastic, for joining us this morning. So if somebody wants to follow you and get in on your conversation, like, who the hell is this guy? It's making so much sense. How do they do that?
Twitter is my main, that's where I'm active the most. It's LTrain87X on Twitter and Instagram. You can follow me there, and on TikTok.
Okay.
I think on TikTok too.
I can't believe you haven't asked him how he got the name yet.
Oh, go ahead, Andy.
How did you get the name, Mr. Fantastic?
Oh, so that I'm a giant nerd. So Mr. Fantastic is of the Fantastic Four. So like, he stretched himself. It was a line out of a Biggie song. And I think he's like, my rapping tactics are drastic, stretching motherfuckers like Mr. Fantastic. So
I know that song.
There you go.
That song stuck with me. So I liked it. So that's why I keep calling myself.
Any Biggie reference is big in our house, which is so funny because we are of Celtic origin, but we love Biggie and Tupac, and so that'll be playing in the background. It's just, love it. So, okay, well, thank you so much for joining us. And this has just been a phenomenal conversation with Mr. Fantastic. And thank you so much for joining us. And, as I explained to him, this is kind of what we do. This is why we started this network, not just independent, non-corporate owned media, but lifting up the grassroots. And this means if you've got a topic, if you've got something you want to talk about, if you have an opinion, if you have an event or something you think is newsworthy that we should be talking about, drop us a line. We will absolutely do it. And I do want to thank everybody who weighed in this morning. And thank you. There's a biggie meme on our Facebook page now. Appreciate that. So thank you to everybody who tuned in. And please follow Mr. Fantastic. Help him. And this is part of what DLF does, is when you have a good conversation, a good, respectful conversation, jump in and support that person. And what that does is helps change the narrative, because at our core, we are still herd animals. And the more people that are going, yeah, wait a second, Medicare for all would actually help me, it gets people thinking that, well, maybe I don't want to be in the minority anymore who's against it. Maybe I want to check this out. So absolutely help him out, follow him, join that conversation. And thank you again, Mr. Fantastic.
Thank you, Kerri. Yeah, have a good one.
Thank you. Andy, any closing thoughts before we officially sign off?
Yes, there's just one thing I wanted to say about defund the police, is that I know that the message has been co-opted by mainstream media, and the other thing is that as soon as the election was over and the neoliberal, moderate Dems were looking to try to explain why they did so poorly against Trump, right? There were some that came out and said that was the wrong message, that defund the police hurt us, right? And it's just so ridiculous. And you have to apply logic to those statements and understand why it's so different and what it means, what defund the police means, right? We want the police to do the job they're supposed to do, right? They're supposed to police the community. They're not supposed to be an occupying force. We need to take away all of their military equipment and give it to the people that actually need it, like teachers.
Thank you, Andy, for that wonderful thought. Teachers with, ATVs, I can kind of get behind.
Those kids are going to learn.
Right. Okay, on that note, happy Friday the 13th, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. We will be back bright and early on Monday morning, 10 a.m. Please like and share this video. Share it widely. And again, if you have any comments, questions, or whatever, and you want us to cover it, drop us a line. You may see it right here, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 10 a.m. Thank you so much.
All right, have a good one.
We bout that, ayy. We in the zone, we out here, yeah. Spitting the facts, how it's supposed to be. Hair of the dog, we keep it G. What?